The Ranger Patrol had been moving through the Afghan valley for 6 hours when the first man dropped. No sound, no warning. Just Sergeant Collins suddenly collapsing mid-stride like someone had cut his strings, blood spreading across the rocky ground before anyone understood what had happened. Then the second shot came, and Corporal Hayes went down screaming, clutching his leg. That's when Lieutenant Marcus Wade realized they weren't just under fire. They were being hunted by snipers who'd positioned themselves perfectly to turn this valley into a killing ground. 7 enemy shooters in elevated positions, hidden among rocks and vegetation, each one covering approaches that made retreat or advance equally suicidal. His 12 remaining Rangers scrambled for whatever cover the terrain offered, pinned down and taking casualties, watching their combat effectiveness evaporate with each passing minute. They had maybe 10 minutes before the snipers adjusted and started picking them off one by one. That's when the diminutive brunette who'd been attached to their patrol as a liaison from intelligence support activity did something that made every Ranger question everything they thought they knew. She unslung the pack everyone assumed contained communications equipment, pulled out a rifle that looked like it belonged in a museum exhibit about precision shooting, and said 4 words that changed the entire tactical situation. "I can fix this." Before we show you how one woman with 7 bullets eliminated 7 enemy snipers in 8 minutes and rewrote every assumption a Ranger platoon had about capability versus appearance, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because what you're about to witness isn't just about marksmanship. It's about the moment an entire combat unit learned that the person they'd been treating like a burden was actually the only reason they'd survive the next 15 minutes. The Hindu Kush Mountains in eastern Afghanistan were brutal in ways that went beyond physical hardship. The terrain was vertical, slopes so steep that movement required hands as much as feet, valleys that looked like gods had taken axes to the landscape and carved channels designed to funnel humans into kill zones. It was country that had swallowed armies for thousands of years, from Alexander's forces to Soviet divisions to American units who thought technology could overcome geology. Ranger Team Sierra 2-3 had been operating in this region for 3 weeks, conducting reconnaissance on Taliban supply routes that intelligence suggested ran through these valleys. It was low-intensity work: observe, report, avoid contact. The kind of mission that was supposed to be boring rather than dangerous. They'd been augmented with a liaison from intelligence support activity 5 days earlier. Staff Sergeant Brielle Murphy, 28 years old, 5'4", maybe 120 pounds, soaking wet. Dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, quiet to the point of silence, carrying equipment that looked too heavy for her frame. The Rangers had made their opinions clear through the universal military language of barely concealed contempt. "Great," Corporal Davis had muttered when she'd joined their patrol. "Now we're babysitting." "ISA sends us someone who looks like she should be filing paperwork," Hayes had added. "Guess they think we need help with the complicated parts, like walking and carrying stuff." Murphy had said nothing, just adjusted her pack and fallen into formation like she'd done this 1,000 times, which should have been their first clue. But Rangers were sometimes too confident in their own capabilities to notice expertise that didn't announce itself. Lieutenant Wade had been more diplomatic, but equally skeptical. ISA liaisons were supposed to provide intelligence coordination and analytical support. They weren't supposed to go on patrol, but higher command had insisted Murphy needed field experience to better understand the operational environment. So Wade got stuck with an additional team member who wouldn't pull her weight in a firefight and would slow them down during movement. For 5 days, Murphy had proven his concerns half right. She kept up during movement, barely, but she managed. She didn't complain. She did what she was told, but she also didn't contribute anything tactical. Just carried her oversized pack, took notes on patrol routes and terrain features, and generally existed as the person nobody talked to unless absolutely necessary. What none of them knew, what couldn't have known because it was buried in classified files they'd never see, was that Staff Sergeant Brielle Murphy had spent the previous 4 years as part of a Joint Special Operations Command sniper team that operated in denied areas across 3 continents. She held the distinction of most confirmed kills by a female sniper in U.S. military history, with 43 enemy combatants eliminated at ranges that averaged 800 meters. She'd been pulled from field operations 6 months earlier after a mission went wrong, sent to ISA for utilization of analytical capabilities, while psychologists decided if she was fit for continued combat duty. The assignment with Ranger Team Sierra 2-3 was supposed to be therapeutic, low-stress field exposure to help her reintegrate. A chance to remember why she'd joined the military without the pressure of high-stakes operations. Instead, it was about to become the most intense 8 minutes of combat any of them would ever experience. The valley had looked clear. Wade had checked it 3 times through his optics before committing the patrol. Open terrain with good sight lines, no obvious ambush positions, satellite imagery showing no enemy activity in the past 72 hours. By every metric, it should have been safe. But someone had prepared this ground with care that went beyond standard Taliban tactics. They'd identified natural positions that offered concealment and elevation. They'd cleared minimal vegetation to create firing lanes without making obvious changes to the landscape. And they'd waited with the patience of professional soldiers who understood that ambushes were about discipline more than firepower. Sergeant Collins was walking point when the first round hit him. The bullet entered just below his helmet rim, precisely placed to defeat body armor and cause instant incapacitation. He dropped without making a sound, dead before his brain could process what had happened. The second shot came 3 seconds later, long enough for the patrol to react to Collins's fall, short enough that they were still processing rather than moving. Hayes took the round in his thigh, missing the femoral artery by inches, but dropping him into screaming agony that announced his position to anyone listening. Wade's combat experience kicked in immediately. "Contact! Snipers, cover now!" The Rangers scattered, diving for whatever protection the valley offered. Boulders, depressions in the ground, a scraggly tree that wouldn't stop bullets, but at least broke up their silhouettes. They were well trained enough to know that staying static meant death. The third shot proved that movement wasn't safety either. Specialist Morrison had been sprinting for a rock cluster when a round caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him in the open. Not fatal, but bad enough that he couldn't move effectively. And now he was exposed, bleeding, vulnerable to a follow-up shot that would finish him. "Morrison's down in the open," Davis shouted. "Someone needs to get to him." Private Thompson started to move, got 3 feet from cover before a round cracked past his head close enough to make him dive back behind the boulder. "Negative. They've got him zeroed. Anyone moves toward him is dead." Murphy had gone to ground behind a boulder that offered decent protection. She was watching the Rangers react with professional assessment, tracking who was where, who was wounded, where the shots were coming from. Her mind was already building a tactical picture, even as her body remained perfectly still. Wade was trying to identify shooter positions while simultaneously coordinating his team's response. "Anyone got eyes on shooters?" "Negative," Davis called back. "Can't see shit. They're concealed." "I've got nothing," Rodriguez added from another position. "These bastards know what they're doing." Another shot. This one missed, sparking off rock near Wade's position, but it confirmed what he already feared. They weren't dealing with one sniper. The shots were coming from multiple directions, multiple elevations. His patrol was in a prepared kill zone, and the enemy had them pinned. "Morrison, can you move?" Wade shouted. "Negative, sir. Shoulders fucked. I try to move, I'm dead." Morrison's voice was tight with pain and fear. He was lying in the open, knowing that the snipers were probably already lining up the kill shot, just waiting for the right moment. Wade's mind ran through options, all of them bad. They couldn't advance. The snipers controlled all approaches. They couldn't retreat effectively. Wounded men would slow them, and movement would draw fire. They couldn't suppress the enemy. You can't suppress what you can't see. Call for air support. 15 minutes minimum, assuming they could even get through to command in these mountains. By then, half his team would be casualties. Another shot cracked through the valley. Jenkins screamed as a round punched through his plate carrier, the ceramics stopping the bullet but cracking ribs and knocking him out of the fight. He collapsed behind cover, gasping for air that wouldn't come properly. "Jesus Christ," Davis muttered. "They're picking us apart." Wade could see the fear spreading through his team. These were Rangers, well-trained, combat experienced, but they were being hunted by an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't fight back against, couldn't escape from. It was every infantry soldier's nightmare, being pinned by snipers with no way to return effective fire. "We're getting chewed up," Davis said, stating the obvious. "Sir, we need to move or we're all dead." Wade knew it was true, but he also knew that moving meant exposing his team to fire they couldn't counter. The tactical situation was approaching unsalvageable. In about 5 more minutes, the enemy snipers would have adjusted to their positions and would start systematically eliminating his Rangers one by one. They'd start with the wounded in the open, then work through the ones in cover, taking their time, making every shot count. Another round impacted near Thompson's position, showering him with rock fragments. "They're adjusting," he shouted, "getting our ranges dialed in." That's when Murphy moved. She came out of cover with her oversized pack, not running but moving with purpose toward Wade's position. A shot cracked past her, close enough that Wade saw rock chips spray near her feet, but she didn't flinch, didn't break stride. Just kept moving with the kind of calm that suggested either she didn't understand the danger or she understood it better than anyone else present. Another shot. This one even closer, the supersonic crack of the bullet passing within inches of her head. The sound should have made her dive for cover, should have triggered the survival instinct that kept soldiers alive. Instead, Murphy just adjusted her path slightly and continued toward Wade's position like she was walking through a training exercise rather than a kill zone. She reached Wade's boulder and dropped into cover next to him, not even breathing hard despite the movement under fire. "Lieutenant, I need you to understand something very quickly." "Not now, Murphy. We're kind of—" "7 shooters," she interrupted, her voice calm and analytical, carrying none of the stress that should have been present in someone who'd just crossed open ground under sniper fire. "Positioned at 11 o'clock high, 1 o'clock high, 2:30 medium elevation, 4 o'clock medium, 5 o'clock high, 7:30 low, and 9 o'clock medium. Ranges between 400 and 650 meters, all using 7.62 platforms, probably SVD Dragunov rifles based on the report signatures. Professional shooting positions, coordinated fields of fire. This isn't random Taliban. This is trained counter-sniper work, probably Chechen or foreign contractors." Wade stared at her, his brain trying to process how she could possibly have that level of detail when his trained Rangers couldn't even identify general directions of fire. "How do you—" "Because that's what I do," Murphy said, unzipping her pack. "I'm not ISA liaison. Well, I am, but that's not what I actually am. I'm a JSOC sniper who got reassigned because I had a bad mission 6 months ago and someone thought I needed therapy. What I actually need is a clear shot in about 8 minutes. She pulled out a rifle that made Wade's eyes widen despite the tactical situation. It wasn't standard military issue. It was a custom bolt-action system that looked like someone had taken precision shooting and turned it into art. A long barrel with a suppressor that added another 14 inches, expensive optics that probably cost more than his truck, modifications that spoke of years of refinement by someone who understood ballistics at a level that went beyond military training. "That's not authorized equipment," Wade said reflexively, his mind still catching up to what was happening. "Neither is letting your entire patrol die because you're too proud to accept help." Murphy was assembling the rifle with movements that were faster than he could follow, her hands moving through the sequence with muscle memory that spoke of thousands of repetitions. "I can eliminate all 7 shooters, but I need you to keep them busy for about 30 seconds while I get positioned, and I need your team to absolutely not shoot at anything I'm shooting at, because confusion about targets is how friendly fire happens." "You're serious," Wade said, still trying to reconcile the quiet woman who'd been dead weight for 5 days with the professional who was calmly discussing eliminating 7 enemy snipers like it was routine business. "Lieutenant, in about 4 minutes, they're going to start dropping your Rangers one by one until you're all dead or captured. I can prevent that, but we're wasting time having this conversation instead of letting me work." She locked a magazine into the rifle with a decisive click that somehow sounded louder than the ongoing gunfire. "Your call. Die proud, or trust the person who's actually trained for this exact scenario." Another shot rang out across the valley. Patterson screamed, taking a round to the leg that shattered his fibula and dropped him into agony. The casualty count was approaching critical, 4 men down out of 14, with the rest pinned and unable to maneuver. Wade made a decision that would either save his team or get them all killed. Do it. What do you need? 30 seconds of suppressive fire. Doesn't need to be accurate, just needs to make them keep their heads down while I reposition. After that, stay down and let me work. Don't try to help. Don't call out targets. Just stay alive while I solve this problem. Murphy was already moving, scanning for a position that would give her the angles she needed. Wade keyed his radio. All elements on my mark, lay down suppressive fire. We don't have targets, just shoot at likely positions. Volume over accuracy. Mark, execute. The Rangers opened up, sending rounds down range toward where they thought the enemy snipers might be. It wasn't effective. You can't suppress what you can't see, but it was noise and bullets, and for 30 seconds, that might be enough to give Murphy the window she needed. Murphy found her position 15 meters from where the Rangers were pinned, a slight rise that offered elevation and clear sightlines across the valley. It wasn't perfect, but perfect wasn't an option when 7 enemy snipers were systematically eliminating your team, and you had maybe 6 minutes before the tactical situation became unrecoverable. She settled into a prone position with the fluid grace of someone who'd done this thousands of times. The rifle came up to her shoulder like it was part of her body, mating with contact points that had been refined through years of practice until the weapon became an extension of her nervous system, eye to scope. Breathing slowed through conscious control. Heart rate dropped from the elevated level of moving under fire back down to the calm 60 beats per minute that made precision shooting possible. Through her optic, the valley resolved into a tactical puzzle she'd been trained to solve. She couldn't see the enemy snipers. They were too well concealed for direct observation, positioned in hides that had been carefully prepared to defeat optical detection. But she could see signs that untrained eyes would miss, the way vegetation moved in patterns that weren't quite natural after shots, the subtle displacement of air that even suppressed rifles created when they fired, the geometry of where bullets were impacting traced backward through ballistic calculations to identify origin points, 400 meters at 11 o'clock high. She'd heard that shot, the distinctive crack thump of a rifle firing from elevation, sound traveling at different speeds than the supersonic bullet it propelled. The crack was the bullet passing overhead. The thump was the muzzle blast arriving delayed by distance. The time differential between the two sounds told her range. The direction told her bearing. Physics and experience combined to paint a target she couldn't see. She tracked to where calculations said the shooter had to be, her scope traversing across terrain that looked empty to untrained observation. Adjusted for the angle, shooting uphill required different calculations than flat ground. Compensated for wind that was blowing erratically through the valley at maybe 5 miles per hour with gusts to 10, the kind of inconsistent conditions that made long-range shooting as much art as science. Found him. Just barely. A hint of shadow in rocks that wasn't quite natural, positioned in a cleft that offered perfect concealment from where the Rangers were pinned, but exposed from Murphy's oblique angle. The shooter was good. He'd chosen his position well, created a hide that defeated direct observation. But he'd made one mistake. He'd assumed threats would only come from the valley floor, not from flanking positions. Murphy's first shot was calculated with precision that went beyond conscious math. Thousands of hours of practice had carved the calculations into her nervous system until she didn't think about wind drift or elevation drop or target movement. She just knew where the bullet needed to go. Her finger found the trigger, pressed through the breakpoint with exactly calibrated pressure that released the sear without disturbing her aim. The rifle coughed, suppressed but not silent, making a sound like someone punching a heavy bag. The recoil was manageable, her body position so solid that the scope barely moved from her eye. She watched through the optic as her bullet crossed 400 meters of space in 0.6 of a second. The shadow that wasn't quite natural jerked once, then went still. The enemy sniper had died without ever knowing where the shot came from, his brain processing the impact of the bullet before it could register the threat. 1 down, 6 remaining. Murphy was already working her bolt, chambering the next round with smooth mechanical precision. The spent casing ejected, tumbling through air in the morning light. Her left hand guided a fresh cartridge into battery. The bolt locked forward with decisive authority. Total time, 1.2 seconds from shot to ready. She transitioned to her second target before the Rangers even understood what had happened, before the other enemy snipers realized one of their team had just been eliminated. Speed was essential now. Each shooter she dropped reduced the enemy's ability to coordinate, degraded their tactical effectiveness, pushed them from hunters into prey. 650 meters at 1 o'clock high. This shooter had just fired, giving away his position through muzzle signature that Murphy's trained eyes caught despite the suppressor. She'd been tracking his general location already, had narrowed his probable position down to a 10-meter circle. The shot confirmed his exact location, let her refine from probable to certain. She adjusted for the increased range. Wind drift became more significant at 650 meters, as did the drop from gravity pulling the bullet toward Earth. Her scope's turrets clicked as she dialed in corrections measured in minutes of angle, adjustments so small they looked insignificant, but meant the difference between hit and miss at this distance. The shooter was repositioning, smart enough to know that staying in the same spot after firing was dangerous. But he was moving to another pre-planned hide, which meant Murphy could predict his destination based on terrain analysis and tactical logic. She waited 2 seconds for him to settle, for him to think he was safe again. Second shot. The rifle coughed again. This time, the bullet traveled for nearly a full second before arriving at its destination with terminal effectiveness. Murphy saw the target jerk and collapse, another enemy combatant who'd never understand what killed him. 2 down, 5 remaining, 4 minutes elapsed. The enemy snipers were starting to realize something was wrong. Their teammates were dying, and they couldn't identify the threat. Murphy was shooting from an unexpected angle, using a suppressed rifle that made directional assessment nearly impossible, eliminating targets before they could react or adjust. The ambush they'd carefully prepared was collapsing, and they didn't understand why. But they were professionals, Chechens who'd learned their trade in brutal conflicts, men who'd survived by being good at killing. They began adjusting, scanning for the new threat, trying to identify where death was coming from. One of them started putting rounds toward Murphy's general area, not accurate fire, but suppressive, trying to force her to keep her head down. Murphy ignored the incoming fire with the kind of calm that came from years of operating under stress. Rounds were impacting 30 meters away, close enough to be concerning, not close enough to force her to move. She had maybe 90 seconds before they adjusted and started getting accurate, which meant she needed to work faster. 420 meters at 230 medium elevation. This shooter had shifted position after her second shot, smart enough to know that staying static was dangerous in a counter-sniper fight. But he'd moved to another pre-planned position, which meant Murphy could predict where he'd go based on the terrain and tactical geometry. The enemy had probably spent days preparing these hides, creating multiple positions for each shooter. Professional work, but predictable once you understood the pattern. She found him settling into his new hide, still scanning for her location, his rifle tracking across the valley as he searched for the threat that had eliminated 2 of his teammates in less than 2 minutes. He was exposed for maybe 3 seconds while he established his new position. Murphy took the shot during that window, third round. The bullet crossed 420 meters and found center mass. The enemy sniper collapsed like someone had turned off his power. 3 down, 4 remaining. The Rangers were watching now with expressions that ranged from shock to awe. Wade had his rifle up scanning for targets, but he was smart enough to stay down and let Murphy work. Davis was calling range estimates over the radio, trying to help Murphy identify threats even though she didn't need the assistance. The rest of the patrol had stopped shooting, realized their suppressive fire was irrelevant compared to what Murphy was doing with surgical precision, 500 meters at 4 o'clock medium elevation. This one was tricky, partially concealed behind vegetation that would deflect bullets if she didn't account for it. Branches and leaves looked soft, but they could push a bullet off course by inches, enough to turn a hit into a miss at this range. Murphy had to thread her shot through the gap in foliage, find the window where her bullet could pass without interference. She studied the vegetation, watched how wind moved it, identified the pattern. waited for the moment when the branches swayed enough to create clearance, timed her shot to the rhythm of the wind. Fourth shot. The bullet passed through the narrow gap with millimeters to spare, found flesh on the other side. The vegetation shuddered with bullet passage, and through her scope, Murphy saw the target collapse backward out of his hide. 4 down, 3 remaining. 6 minutes elapsed. The remaining 3 enemy snipers finally identified Murphy's position, not precisely, but close enough. Rounds started impacting near her location, not close enough to hit, but close enough to force her to adjust. Rock chips sprayed across her position. 1 bullet struck 2 meters in front of her, the impact showering her with debris. Professional discipline kept her from flinching. She'd been shot at before, had learned to ignore the human instinct to seek cover when bullets came close. Instead, she rolled left in a smooth motion, found new cover behind a different rock, re-established her shooting position in 3 seconds that spoke of practice most people couldn't imagine. The movement saved her life. 2 rounds impacted exactly where she'd been lying, arriving half a second after she'd relocated. The enemy snipers were good. They'd correctly identified her position and were putting accurate fire on it. But Murphy was better. 530 meters at 5 o'clock high. This shooter was very good. He'd correctly identified her position, called it out to his remaining teammates, and was preparing to engage with precision that suggested extensive training. Murphy had maybe 2 seconds before he fired, and at this range with her partially exposed, a hit was extremely likely. She fired first. Didn't bother with perfect aim, didn't wait for optimal conditions, just put the round close enough that the enemy sniper flinched, disrupting his shot sequence. His bullet went wide, sparking off rock 10 feet from Murphy's position, dangerous but not deadly. Before he could cycle his bolt for a second shot, Murphy had already adjusted her aim and fired again. The first round had been harassment, the second was elimination. 5th shot, 5 down, 2 remaining. 7 minutes elapsed. The last 2 enemy snipers went defensive, prioritizing survival over mission completion. Murphy could sense the change in their behavior. They stopped trying to hunt, started trying to survive. Professional soldiers who recognized when the tactical situation had turned against them and understood that staying in the fight meant dying uselessly. They began repositioning, trying to create angles that would let them engage while minimizing exposure. One of them put down sustained covering fire toward Murphy's position, not accurate, but volume enough to make her keep her head down while his partner attempted to relocate. Murphy tracked the movement through sound and muzzle flash pattern. 700 meters at 730 low elevation. This was her longest shot of the engagement, complicated by the fact that the shooter was partially defilated behind a rise in terrain. She could see his head and shoulders, nothing else. In most tactical doctrines, you didn't take the shot, too much risk of a miss that would alert the target and waste ammunition. Murphy took the shot. The bullet arced through the valley, fighting wind that tried to push it left, dropping through elevation changes that put it below her line of sight for most of its flight. The trajectory was complex, up from her muzzle, reaching apex at maybe 200 meters, then descending in a parabolic curve that brought it back into sight at the last moment. Through her scope, she watched the bullet arrive. The enemy sniper's head snapped back, and he dropped out of sight behind the terrain feature that had been protecting his body. Headshot at 700 meters on a partially concealed target, the kind of shot that would be debated in training classrooms as either incredibly skilled or impossibly lucky. Murphy knew it was skill. Luck was what happened to people who didn't understand ballistics well enough to make their own. 6 down, 1 remaining. The last enemy sniper broke. Murphy saw it in his movement patterns, the frantic repositioning, the wild shots that weren't aimed at anything specific, the body language of someone who'd gone from hunter to hunted and couldn't process the reversal. He was the youngest of the team, probably, the one with less experience, the one who'd never been on the receiving end of a counter-sniper who was systematically dismantling his entire element. 400 meters at 9 o'clock medium elevation. He'd stopped moving, turned himself into a statue, hoping that absolute stillness would save him. It was a valid tactic against most opponents. Motion attracted attention, and a motionless human could blend into terrain effectively. But Murphy didn't need him to move. She'd been tracking his position since the beginning, had cataloged every hide, every position, every place where the enemy team had prepared fighting positions. She knew exactly where he was, even though her scope showed nothing but rocks and scrub vegetation and shadows that might or might not contain a human being. She aimed at a shadow that her training said was wrong. The angle was slightly off. The shape didn't quite match natural terrain features. It was the kind of detail that only someone with 7 years of professional sniper experience would notice. The subtle wrongness that separated excellent concealment from perfect concealment. She trusted her training, trusted her instinct, trusted the thousands of hours she'd spent learning to read terrain and identify threats that wanted to be invisible. Fired. The shadow moved, just a twitch, just enough to confirm the hit. Then it was still again, but this time with the permanent stillness that meant the threat was eliminated. 7 shots, 7 enemy snipers dead, 8 minutes and 15 seconds elapsed. Murphy safed her rifle and stood up slowly, scanning the valley one more time to confirm all threats were neutralized. Her body was relaxed, her breathing normal, showing none of the stress that should have accompanied an 8-minute gunfight against professional snipers who'd been trying to kill her. To the watching Rangers, she looked like someone who'd just finished a training exercise rather than someone who'd saved their entire patrol through marksmanship that shouldn't have been possible. "Clear," she said calmly, beginning to break down her rifle for storage. "You'll want to send teams to confirm kills and collect intelligence. They're professionals, probably foreign contractors based on the quality of their positioning and the discipline of their fire, not standard Taliban, too coordinated, too well-equipped. My guess is Chechen based on the tactics, but you'll need to check bodies for confirmation." She packed her rifle with methodical precision, every movement economical, returning the weapon to the pack that everyone had assumed just contained communications gear. Within 60 seconds, she was back to looking like the quiet ISA liaison who'd been nearly invisible for 5 days. The Rangers were staring at her like she'd appeared from another dimension. Wade found his voice first, though it took him several attempts. "Who the hell are you?" he finally managed. Murphy shouldered her pack and looked at him with an expression that was patient, but firm. "I already told you, Lieutenant. JSOC sniper. 43 confirmed kills before today. 50 now, assuming all 7 are confirmed dead when your people check. And before you ask, yes, I should have mentioned it earlier, but I was under orders to maintain cover unless circumstances required otherwise. These circumstances definitely required otherwise." She walked past the stunned Rangers toward where Morrison lay wounded in the open, the Ranger who'd been pinned by enemy sniper fire for the past 8 minutes. "Someone help me get casualties stabilized. We still need to extract, and those shots will bring reinforcements if there are any nearby. Let's not waste the time I just bought us." The patrol extracted without further incident. Murphy's assessment of the enemy snipers proved correct. They were Chechen contractors, highly trained, operating as part of a Taliban support unit that specialized in ambushing coalition forces. The intelligence collected from their positions and equipment would lead to the disruption of an entire network of foreign fighters operating in the region, save dozens of American lives over the following months, and result in classified commendations that Murphy would never be able to publicly acknowledge. But that was strategic aftermath that took weeks to unfold. The immediate aftermath was 13 Rangers trying to process what they'd witnessed, trying to reconcile 5 days of assumptions with 8 minutes of reality. On the helicopter back to base, Wade sat next to Murphy, who was back to being quiet and unassuming, like she hadn't just saved his entire patrol through marksmanship that bordered on supernatural. She was writing in a small notebook, after-action observations probably, the kind of professional documentation that good operators maintained regardless of circumstances. "Why didn't you tell us?" Wade asked finally. "Why let us think you were just a liaison?" Murphy looked up from her notebook, considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Would you have believed me if I'd told you on day 1 that I was a JSOC sniper? A woman who looks like she should be analyzing intelligence reports rather than eliminating threats at 700 meters?" Wade started to protest, then stopped. She was right. He wouldn't have believed her, would have thought she was exaggerating or delusional or trying to impress people who didn't need impressing. His assumptions about what capability looked like had been challenged, and he'd failed the test spectacularly. "You let us underestimate you," he said. "I let you reveal your biases," Murphy corrected gently. "There's a difference. I was fine being underestimated. It's comfortable. No pressure, no expectations. People leave you alone when they think you're not worth their attention. But when those 7 snipers opened up on your patrol, comfort stopped being relevant. So I did my job." "Your job is ISA liaison," Davis interjected from across the cabin. He'd been listening, still processing his own assumptions being shattered, still trying to understand how someone he'd dismissed as dead weight had turned out to be the most capable person on the patrol. "My job is whatever the mission requires," Murphy replied, her tone patient but firm. "Today it required eliminating 7 enemy snipers before they eliminated you. Yesterday it required carrying a heavy pack and taking notes on terrain features. Tomorrow it'll probably be back to analysis and coordination. That's how special operations work. You do what needs doing, not what your job description says." She returned to her notebook, her demeanor suggesting the conversation was over. The Rangers exchanged glances, each one silently reassessing their treatment of the woman who'd saved their lives, each one recognizing the assumptions they'd made and the consequences those assumptions could have had. When they reached base, Murphy disappeared into debriefing that would take hours. The Rangers went to medical for evaluation and treatment of the wounded. Collins had been killed. The first shot had been instantly fatal, never had a chance. Hayes and Morrison would recover fully with months of physical therapy. Jenkins had cracked ribs but would be fine within weeks. Patterson's leg wound was serious, but the surgeon was confident about full recovery. It could have been so much worse, should have been so much worse. Would have been, without question, if not for a 5'4" woman who'd been invisible until the moment she became the only thing standing between a Ranger patrol and annihilation. 3 days later, Wade received orders reassigning Murphy back to JSOC operational status. The therapeutic attachment to a Ranger unit had served its purpose. She'd proven to herself and to oversight that she could still operate under stress, that the bad mission 6 months ago hadn't broken her ability to function in combat. More importantly, she'd demonstrated capabilities that made her too valuable to waste on desk work. Wade found her before she left, packing her gear in temporary quarters with the same methodical precision she applied to everything. Every item had its place, every piece of equipment was checked and secured with professional attention to detail. "I owe you an apology," he said. Murphy looked up from her packing, met his eyes. "You don't owe me anything, Lieutenant. You made assumptions based on available information and standard heuristics about what capability looks like. That's human nature. The problem isn't that you underestimated me. It's that military culture teaches you to underestimate people who don't fit a particular profile. Height, gender, apparent physical capability, these become proxies for actual skill. And they're terrible proxies." 7 shots, Wade said, still processing it. 7 kills in 8 minutes, under fire, against professionals. Is that normal for you? "It's good, but not exceptional," Murphy replied with professional honesty. "I've made harder shots under worse conditions. Syria, 2019, 11 targets eliminated in 12 minutes while taking indirect fire from mortars. Iraq, 2020, 13 targets over a 4-hour engagement in an urban environment. Today was just eliminating concealed targets at medium range under time pressure. Textbook counter-sniper work, nothing exotic." She finished packing and stood, slinging her pack over her shoulder. The pack that everyone had assumed was too heavy for her, that actually contained a custom rifle system worth more than most cars and represented years of expertise most people never encountered. "Can I ask you something?" Wade said. "Why do you do it? The quiet thing, letting people underestimate you. It must get frustrating." Murphy smiled slightly, the first real emotion Wade had seen from her in the entire week they'd worked together. "Lieutenant, I've spent 7 years operating in countries where being underestimated was the difference between completing missions and getting captured. I've learned that looking harmless is a tactical advantage. People don't shoot at threats they don't see. They don't prepare for capabilities they don't expect. By the time they realize what they're facing, it's too late. She extended her hand. Your Rangers are good soldiers. They just need to learn that capability doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the valley is the quiet one, taking notes and carrying a heavy pack. Wade shook her hand, noting the grip strength that contradicted her slight frame, the calluses that came from thousands of hours of rifle work. If you ever need anything— You'll never see me again, Lieutenant, Murphy interrupted, not unkindly. That's how JSOC works. We appear when we're needed, do the job, then disappear back into whatever cover identity comes next. But if by some chance our paths do cross again, try to remember this conversation before you make assumptions about my capabilities, or anyone else's. She walked away toward a helicopter that was waiting to extract her to wherever JSOC needed her next. Wade watched her go, this diminutive woman who'd saved his entire patrol through marksmanship that had seemed impossible right up until she'd demonstrated it with clinical precision. He'd learned something in that valley, something that would stay with him for the rest of his career. Never judge capability by appearance. Never assume that quiet means weak. And never, ever underestimate the person who seems content to stay in the background, because sometimes that person is the only thing standing between you and disaster. The story spread through the Ranger community with the speed that only really good stories achieve, about the ISA liaison who'd turned out to be a JSOC sniper, about 7 Chechen contractors eliminated in 8 minutes, about assumptions shattered and lives saved by someone nobody had taken seriously until the moment her capabilities became the difference between survival and catastrophe. Details got exaggerated in the retelling, as they always did. By some accounts, Murphy had eliminated 12 snipers. Others claimed the shots were made at over 1,000 meters. A few insisted she'd done it all with iron sights, which was obvious nonsense but made for a better bar story. The core remained true. A woman who'd been treated as a burden had proven to be exactly what the situation required. And in the process, she'd taught an entire Ranger platoon a lesson about capability versus appearance that they'd carry for the rest of their careers. Murphy continued her work with JSOC, operating in places that didn't officially exist on any map, making shots that were classified above the level most people would ever see, collecting a list of accomplishments that would never be publicly acknowledged. She'd add many more confirmed kills to her record over the following years, 63 by the time she finally rotated out of field operations, making her one of the most lethal snipers in U.S. military history, regardless of gender. But she never advertised her capabilities, never sought recognition or validation, just continued doing the work quietly, professionally, letting people underestimate her right up until the moment circumstances required her to demonstrate why underestimation could be a fatal mistake. Because that's what quiet professionals did. They maintained capabilities in silence. They accepted being overlooked and undervalued. And when the moment came, when lives hung in the balance and conventional solutions had failed, they stepped forward and did the impossible without drama or expectation of glory. The wolf doesn't announce itself to the sheep. It watches. It waits. It lets the sheep assume it's harmless. And when danger comes, when the flock is threatened by predators the sheep can't even see, the wolf reminds everyone that capability and appearance are sometimes separated by assumptions that can cost lives. Lieutenant Wade never forgot that lesson. Neither did the 12 Rangers who survived that valley because someone they'd dismissed as dead weight turned out to be the most capable person on the patrol. They learned what Special Operations Forces already knew: never judge capability by appearance, never assume that quiet means weak, and never underestimate the person who seems content to stay in the background. Because sometimes that person is the only thing standing between you and disaster. And when they finally step forward, when they finally demonstrate what they're actually capable of, the only appropriate response is gratitude and respect earned through actions that speak louder than any credential or announcement ever could. Staff Sergeant Brielle Murphy never asked for either gratitude or respect. She just continued doing her job, quietly, professionally, lethally, the way it was supposed to be, every single time, without exception, because that's what mastery looked like when it existed, at levels most people couldn't comprehend. Silent, unassuming, absolutely devastating when circumstances demanded it, the way the best operators had always worked, the way they always would. Thanks for watching. Every woman has a story worth telling. Join us to hear them all.